Burgerlicious, so delicious, make those boys go crazy. Always thinking that, oh my gosh. This video was sponsored by Bespoke Post.
Hi, welcome to another video. In this video, I'm going to show you how I made this giant geometric barn door. I know it looks hard, but believe me, it's not. It's actually pretty simple, and I'm going to show you exactly how I did it and the easy way to make geometric patterns in wood. So follow along, subscribe down below, check the link in the video description for my Patreon page and products and all that stuff, and just enjoy yourself. I'm going to go brush my teeth.
So you want to do a barn door, and you want to do some crazy geometric pattern on the front. Well, don't worry, it's easy. I'm going to hold your sweaty little palms through this entire process. Now, the first trick to doing any sort of crazy geometric pattern with wood going every which way is to not do solid pieces of wood. You try and glue up solid pieces of wood in a crazy geometric pattern, that wood will eventually move and it's going to look terrible. What you want to do is rather cut down a bunch of thin strips that you can glue down to a substrate, and that way you won't have to worry about wood movement. I started by cutting down a bunch of strips 1.25 inches wide and 3/4 inch thick, but that's still too thick. So now we're going to take all these pieces and we're going to rip them in half. Now you might be wondering, why aren't you going to resaw them on the bandsaw? Well, because I got a zillion of them, and that would be a nightmare and take forever. I know I'm going to lose a little material, but I decided just to rip them all down on the table saw. So after setting up my little safety push block stick thingamabob, I start running pieces through, ripping them down to just over 1/4 inch. Now I know this isn't going to leave a nice clean edge, but don't worry, we'll take all these pieces and run them through the planer here shortly. And by shortly, I mean right now. Now, you want to plane these down to a nice thin level to avoid, wood movement and the such, but you don't want to make them so thin that they're brittle and are just going to break as you're trying to move them around. So I planed them down to, about 3/16 maybe. I also wanted to mention what I'm doing here. I got comments on a video one time that I was sticking my hands in the planer, which I'm not. My hands are nowhere near the blades. I'm just holding the pieces down as they come out the back side of the planer to avoid any snipe on each individual piece. Pretty soon I've got quite a few strips milled down to a good thickness. Next, I wanted to soften the edge of each piece. I'll show you why here in just a second, but basically, if you're doing any sort of geometric pattern, you don't want to leave nice, crisp edges because, well, you want people to see the pattern in the wood. And if you leave nice, crisp edges, well, it makes it really hard to see that pattern. I started out by just trying to knock down that edge with a hand sander and quickly realized that that was awkward and would take forever. So I just chopped my whole stack of pieces down and then went over to the oscillating belt sander and very quickly gave a nice rounded over edge on 2 sides of each piece. This also makes a top and a bottom of the piece, so you want to remember that when you're orienting the pieces on your barn door. Now for example of what I was talking about. Here's 3 pieces with just stock crisp edges. When you stick them together, see how they just all blend and you can't really differentiate one piece from another? Then here's 3 pieces that I've sanded and knocked that edge down. See how it makes a nice distinguished line and will really highlight whatever pattern you're going for on your barn door, or headboard, or closet door, or coffee table, or dining table, whatever you're doing. It just helps, people be able to see that pattern. With all of my pieces milled down and ready to go, it was time to grab a substrate on which to glue them to. Now, my pattern is only going to be on one side of this door, so the back side is just going to be whatever the substrate is. So for that, I wanted to use a white oak veneered plywood. So I grabbed my piece of plywood, I marked out roughly the size of my barn door. I cut it a little big. I gave myself 1 inch wiggle room on either side, and I went over to the table saw and ripped it down. With my rough shape of the barn door cut out, it was time to start laying out where my pattern was going to land. So the first thing I did was get a T-square and find the dead center of my barn door from top to bottom. Then I did the same thing from left to right, making a nice axis in the middle of my piece that I can base my entire pattern off of. See, center from top to bottom and center from left to right. This will come in handy here in just a minute. Next, I took one of my pieces that I already milled down and I cut an angle of 22.5 degrees on one end. Then I measured 3 inches up from top to bottom on either side of that middle line. Then using my piece with that 22.5 degree angle, I used this as an edge to draw another line. Now this is kind of going to be the stopping point for one portion of the pattern. A lot of people think that you have to cut each individual piece and glue it on to any sort of geometric mosaic or something like that. And that's actually the wrong way you want to do it. The whole goal should be to try and make as few cuts as possible. When you start laying out a pattern, you really want to look for your straight lines. Build everything to a straight line and cut it down with a track saw. If that doesn't make any sense, don't worry, I'm going to walk you through the entire process. Here's all my lines and marks that, at least in my head, I know what they mean and where things need to stop. So let's start getting some wood glued down to this substrate. Now the easiest way to get nice crisp lines in a geometric pattern is to align them to a straight edge. I know my pattern is identical on both sides, left to right. It's a mirror image of itself. So the first thing I do is take that offcut from my plywood substrate and I clamp it in the middle right on that center line. This is going to give me a nice straight edge to align everything on one side of the barn door too, making sure that I'll end up with perfect seams. After I get that clamped down, I take all of my pieces of oak that I've already milled down and I cut an angle of 22.5 degrees on every single one of them. Fun fact, 22.5 degrees is the only angle you will need to cut for this entire pattern. That's it. Everything's 22.5 degrees. So once you get your saw set to, should I say it again, 22.5 degrees, well, just leave it. Don't touch it. That's all you're going to want to do. So just walk away. Well, finish making all your cuts and then you can walk away. Now, not only do my pre-drawn lines help me line up everything, but they also show me where I want to put glue and where I don't want to put glue. Now we're going to just stick all these pieces on here, long, overhanging those lines, and come back and cut a perfect edge with the track saw. So we want to make sure not to glue them down where we want them to be cut off. I like to start in just small sections, squirting some glue down, spreading it out. This way it doesn't start to dry before I get all my pieces down. I've also counted out how many pieces I'm using here because whatever we use on the top, we're going to want to use that same number of strips on the bottom so everything is nice and even and matches. After I get all of my pieces glued down, it's time to do the really fun and satisfying part. That's to pull out the track saw, slap down the track, and trim them all down flush to the edge of my piece of plywood. Zip, zop, zoop. Yeah, that's right. Quick and easy. Once we've trimmed all the pieces down flush with the plywood substrate on the outside, we next need to match them to that original line we drew on the substrate itself. So just grabbing another one of my strips with that 22.5 degree angle, I transfer that line onto my freshly laid down oak strips, plop my track back on top, and once again use the track saw to get a nice, crisp, perfect line. Now, isn't this way easier than trying to cut each individual piece to the right length and the right angle? You're never going to get it right, you're always going to get gaps, and in the end, it's just not going to look as good. So lay down large chunks, overhang your line, and come back and cut everything you can in a nice straight line with the track saw. With my first section laid, it's time to move down to the lower section. So I take all of my offcut pieces over to the chop saw and I cut a fresh new angle on each one. Now in theory, the angle that I cut with the track saw should be pretty close to 22.5 degrees, but pretty close just isn't going to cut it when you're trying to get nice, crisp lines. So I trust the chop saw much more than the track saw for cutting fine angles. So with a new angle on each piece, I head back over to my substrate plywood and I start laying them out. Now this time I'm going to lay them all out before I glue them down. This way it'll show me how far down the board I need to go. Once I lay them all out, I take a pencil and I draw a nice crisp line at the end. This will show me exactly where I need to stop laying down glue so I don't make a bigger mess than necessary. And then all I really have to do now is repeat the same process I did on the top. Squirting a nice amount of glue all over that plywood in small sections and using a Rockler glue brush to smear it around into a nice uniformed even layer. You notice I leave the glue just shy of my edges. I don't really need the glue there, they'll hold down just fine, and if you can, you want to try and avoid squeeze out as much as possible. Once I get all my pieces laid down and pinned in place with a 23 gauge brad nailer, which is always my weapon of choice for doing work like this because you can't really see those nail holes and they're easy to fill if you can. Next, I grab that track saw again and I cut another nice, fresh, clean edge. Man, it looks perfect and we hardly did any work. Shh, don't tell anybody how easy this really is to do. With one half of our pattern laid, we can now remove that scrap piece of ply that we were using as a straight edge, and now the pattern that we've already put down becomes our new straight edge that we can align everything else off of. You just want to take your time here and make sure that you're getting your angle exactly the same on this side as you had it on the other side, or else things can start to get a little wonky. So once again, I lay everything out beforehand, making sure it all lines up on all my lines exactly where I want it. Then I remove all the pieces and yeah, you guessed it. Squeeze a little more glue, spread it out, and tack down some more pieces. Easy peasy glue bottle squeezy. Anyways, I think you're starting to get the picture here. Now you'll notice as I'm laying down these pieces that you can see each individual line. Well, that's only because we took the time to just soften that edge. If we hadn't, this pattern would be much harder to discern, and I'm telling you, it just wouldn't look as good. So take the time to do that one added step and soften those edges. You won't regret it. In no time, we had our third section all glued and tacked in place, and oh, the foreman stopped by to check on how I was Oh, what? He gave me a gift? The foreman gave me something to eat? Oh man, I love it when this kid stops by and shares his treats with me. Just the pick-me-up I needed to get this pattern complete. With him gone, I set my new confectory aside and I got back to work. Once all those pieces were in place, I took the track saw and zip, zop, zoop. I trimmed them all down, looking fresh and clean. Now you might be wondering how I'm doing this and not cutting into the top of my substrate. Well, I am, but it's just a little tiny bit. Just raise the saw blade. Don't be a weirdo and cut all the way through. Obviously, that would be a bad idea, but I feel like some of you are going to comment about it, so I needed to say something. Next, it was on to my last and final section of the actual geometric shape itself. So once again, I laid all my pieces out, drew a line to mark where my glue needed to go, and started smearing that stuff around. Is anybody else having deja vu at this point? Like you've already seen this exact same process 3 other times? Don't worry, we're almost on to something new, like dropping my nail gun on the floor. But anyways, eventually I got all the pieces glued and laid, and it was time for our final pass with the track saw. And what do you know, just like that, we've got a beautiful geometric pattern taking shape right before our eyes.
This video was sponsored by Bespoke Post. Now, what is Bespoke Post? It's just a monthly membership club delivering top shelf products from under the radar brands, and it's free to join. Every month, they send their members just cool, sweet new products. They just sent me a bunch of stuff. I'm gonna take a look and show you what I got. I mean, I got some really cool stuff, so let's take a look.
This is the Stealth Box. It's got all your everyday carry needs fulfilled. This cool little metal carrying case that you can put pills in. I'm always needing ibuprofen and I don't have a full bottle in my pocket ever, so that thing's sweet. This fold-out knife, I used to have this exact same knife and I loved it, but I lost it. So glad they sent me another one. This is like the coolest pen in the world. It's got a stylus tip on one end to use on your iPad. It's got a level, it's got measurements. The end unscrews to become a screwdriver. And then to top it all off, you get this sweet money clip that you can hold your money in. Low profile, easy to use. And then I got the Flame Box. It's amazing. It comes with this, basically a desktop campfire that's easy to use and crazy easy to set up. You just pour some alcohol in and light it, and boom, instant campfire. How cool is that? And possibly my favorite box is the Last Call box. It's basically everything you need for a sweet home bar setup. Some garnishes, a home bar essential checklist that tells you all the essentials for home bar kits. You got a cranberry sage syrup, a hot toddy syrup, a grapefruit jalapeno soda, Moscow mule mixer, and a smoked honey and whiskey cocktail mixer. So you're pretty set up to make some tasty drinks. Every box has around $70 in value, but costs only $45. 90% of the products in Bespoke Post boxes come from small businesses, many of which are based right here in the US. And you only pay for what you want. When you get a box, you can either keep it, swap it for a different box, or skip that month entirely for absolutely no charge. When you go to their website to sign up, they have you fill out a short quiz, which basically asks you a bunch of questions about the type of stuff you like, so you know that each box is tailored to fit your specific needs and wants. What could be better than that? I mean, there's really no reason not to sign up.
If you want to get 20% off your first box, click the link in the video description and use coupon code MOTH20. That's all caps, MOTH20. Or go to bspk.me/MOTH20 and sign up today. It's great for yourself, it makes a great gift, and you get great stuff and can make great cocktails. So go sign up.
With the main portion of our geometric shape laid, there was just one issue, this middle diamond section. Now, my original thought was to fill that with a solid piece of oak. So I got out some paper, I taped it nice and taut over my shape, and then I used a pencil to transfer that shape onto my piece of paper. I don't remember where I learned this trick, but it works great if you're trying to find the exact shape of an internal piece like this, and it's kind of funky and you don't want to mess around with doing math or trying to get a perfect measurement. Then I took a piece of oak, I milled it down to the exact same thickness as all my other pieces, and I took my piece of paper with my shape on it, made sure that the board was wide enough to hold that paper. Then I got a bottle of very drippy, leaky spray adhesive, sprayed it on top of the piece, and laid down my piece of paper, just like so. Then I got a straight edge, I plopped it right down on the line of my shape, and using an X-Acto knife, I trimmed away all the excess paper to give me a nice clear picture of the exact shape I was trying to cut out. Then I simply removed all of the excess paper that I didn't need, and boom, I have the exact shape that I need for the center of this geometric pattern. Next, I took that board over to my bandsaw and I cut out the shape, cutting pretty darn close to the edge of my paper, but not so close that I went into the paper itself, leaving just a whisper of wood on the outside of that line. Once I got this shape completely cut out, we were pretty close, but not quite there yet. Next, I went over to my oscillating belt sander, and keeping a very close eye on the edge of that paper, I brought that line down until it was perfect. Then I walked over, tested to see if it fit, and what do you know? It's gonna fit perfect. So I pulled it back out, removed my paper, and glued it in place. With that, our geometric shape was complete, and looking a lot like a creepy eye staring right at you. I just think that maybe I hate this. So after spending all that time to fill the center with a solid piece of oak, I decided to rip it out because it was ugly and had no purpose being there. Sometimes you just make mistakes in design. That's okay. Just do it over. When it comes to design, always go with your gut. If you don't think something looks right and you don't like it immediately, then just do it over again. You're never gonna like it. It will not grow on you. Unless, of course, your wife likes it. Then you just kind of have to live with it. I've learned that the hard way a time or two. For now, I decided to forget that part and start working on kind of the background of the geometric shape. So I laid out a bunch more strips at 22.5-degree angles, I plopped them on there, I trimmed them down with a track saw, and what do you know? Once again, I absolutely hated it. This is where you really gotta be picky. I mean, you agree that those white strips in there just look like total garbage, right? Yeah, I thought they looked stupid too. So after gluing them and tacking them in place, I just had to rip them out. It was gonna look much better if I went for a more consistent looking piece of oak to plop in there. So away they go and on to something new. So often have I seen people come out with mediocre pieces because they're trying desperately to just save material, which means that they sacrifice on the overall look of the piece. In the end, what's more important? Actually liking the piece you're making or saving a few bucks on material? Obviously, it's saving a few bucks on material. No, I'm just kidding. You should probably like the piece that you're making. As I mentioned before, all these pieces are cut to the exact same angle. So believe it or not, these pieces, even though they're oriented completely different, are cut to that same 22.5-degree angle. Remember when I said just set your saw to that and forget about it? Yeah, I wasn't joking. So in no time, I was able to get this lower half completely covered in those oak slats and trimmed down on the track saw. Pretty soon, I was down to my final piece, and wow, this thing is really starting to look like something. Now to fix this middle section. Now because I had already spent so much time getting this middle shape perfect, I thought it would be a shame to just waste it. So instead of wasting it, I decided to use it as the perfect shaped template to fill my center with something else. I decided to just go with the same thing I did around the other parts of the geometric shape. Vertical slats that would continue the pattern from top to bottom. So after covering my first attempt with double-sided tape, I then just started laying strips on top of it, making sure they were nice and firmly stuck to that double-sided tape. Now, I for a moment thought about using this as a router template, taking it over to the router and just trimming the whole thing down. But the pieces weren't held on there super great with that double-sided tape, and they were all end grain, and I just didn't like the thought of trying to do that on the router table. So I just went back to the same method I used on the first attempt. I first trimmed it down roughly to the right size over on the bandsaw, and once that shape was completely cut out, all I had to do was take it over to the oscillating belt sander and just clean it up a little bit. And while I was doing that, I also used the belt sander to just soften the edge of each side of this diamond pattern thingamabob. Once I had it sanded down and thinking it would fit properly, I took it over and just started peeling pieces off and sticking them in place. If all goes well, this should fit just as perfect as that original piece, but have a much cleaner, more uniformed look that should match everything a lot better than some giant, ugly, dark eye staring you in the face every morning. Oh, that's a story for another time. I know everyone's opinion is different, but in my mind, this option looked much better than the first. And that's really all that matters, that you're happy with the look of your piece. If you like it, well then don't listen to anyone else. They can just go to anger management or something like that. With all of my pieces now laid on my oak substrate, I just took a few minutes to fill those 23 gauge holes. Now, this step is really optional. I don't know if you've ever used a 23 gauge pin nailer before, but the holes are pretty microscopic. You could totally get away with not filling them, but you might as well put something in there. After that, it was time for my favorite thing in the world, sanding the whole flippin' thing down so it was nice and smooth and clean looking. But that's enough of that. And then remember how I said I cut my substrate about an inch big on each side just to make sure that I could clean it up properly afterwards. So with all my pieces laid and sanded, I now cut my piece to its final size. Trimming off this top part was pretty darn satisfying. Anyways, with that, our whole geometric shape piece is laid. But oh, we're not done yet. For For this thing to be a functioning door, we need to add a border to really lock all those pieces in and give us a nice finished clean look. For the border, I decided to use 8-quarter white oak to make a nice sturdy frame on which we could mount our barn door hardware. So I'm basically just making a giant shaker style door, very similar to the closet doors I made in my previous closet door video. If you want to see detailed of exactly how to put that door together, you can go watch that video by clicking that little thing in the upper right hand corner. But for now, I'm just going to run you through the process. I start by cutting all my pieces to size and running a 1-inch deep by 3/4 inch wide dado down the center of each board. Then I take my top and bottom rails and I mark 1 inch in from the end of each one of those pieces. And again, using the dado saw and a Rockler crosscut sled, I add a nice tenon to the end of each one of my rails, the exact same depth as my dado, so that, the tenon can go inside the dado. Next, I take all my pieces and just do a little dry fit to make sure that everything is fitting together as it should. A little tap, 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 a little bang, 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 and what do you know? It all fits. Pretty darn good, actually. I love the way tongue and groove looks. Sexy. With all of my border pieces cut and dry fit the way that I want them to, it was time to try and shove our geometric panel in place. Now, this is an 8-foot tall door, and that middle panel is very heavy, so I was trying to think of the best way to get this in here. In the end, I decided to clamp up 3 sides to my workbench so they wouldn't move around, and just hope that it would slide effortlessly into place. And it did. For about, 10 inches. And then it got a little more difficult. So, with a little tapping and banging and crazy clamp work, I eventually got it to work its way in there, right where it needed to be, and was confident that everything would fit as it should. I threw a few clamps on there just to make sure that those seams would close, and we are ready to glue this thing together. So after getting it all together, it was time to, pull it all apart and actually add some glue to those joints, which are a little tight, but that's okay. They should be. Now, I know there's a hot debate out there on whether or not panels in a shaker-style door like this should be glued or truly just floating. I go back and forth depending on what the panel's actually made of. Now, normally, if the internal panel was hardwood, I would say don't glue that thing in place. You want it to move around. But I broke my own rule here, thinking that these thin strips, which are basically a veneer on top of plywood, which is stable, weren't going to move around much. So I locked them in there with some glue. I don't know if this was a smart thing to do, but I think it'll be okay in the end. As you can see, everything came together nice and tight with just the right amount of squeeze out on all of my joints. The next morning, I came out and removed all my clamps, and it was time to, do my most favorite activity in the entire world, and that was, sand everything flipping down again. I don't know if I've mentioned it in previous videos, but I hate sanding. After sanding one side, I flipped it over and sanded the other side, which you can see is just that clean oak veneered panel. Then I carved out a little recess in the back for this slim black handle, and with that, we were ready to put some finish on this white oak. Now I know what you're thinking. It's white oak. He's obviously going to use Rubio Monocoat cotton white. Well, you are wrong. I'm actually not. I went for a new color option this time, Rubio Monocoat Mudlight. It gives it a nice kind of dirty, warm look with just a hint of gray. I did a few test samples on some scrap pieces of white oak, and I just loved the way it looked. Who knows? Maybe Mudlight is the new cotton white. After finishing the entire backside, I then remembered that I forgot I needed to cut a groove in the very bottom of the door. This groove will work with the hardware for the barn door that keeps the door from swinging out away from the wall. So with the help of my track saw and a few clamping squares, I had that groove cut in no time. As you can see, this little metal piece will get attached to the floor and then it'll ride in this groove, making it so the door cannot swing out away from the wall. With that, I flipped the whole thing over and it was time to finish the final side. Now, because I softened the edge on all these pieces, I was a little worried about that little line getting gunked up with finish. So my solution to this was just to use a foam brush and go really slow, using just a small amount of finish, and trying to keep it out of those cracks as much as possible. This turned out not to be possible, but in the end, it wasn't too hard to clean out each groove with a paper towel. And in no time, it was looking crisp and clean, like a sardine, which is neither crisp or clean, come to think of it. They're more stinky and oily, unless we're talking about living sardines. In that case, they're slippery and salty, but I digress. With the door completely finished, I let it sit for a few hours, and then I was ready to mount my barn door hardware. Now, I forget off the top of my head the name of this company that makes the hardware. I will include a link in the video description, but it's one of the best barn door hardware kits I've ever found. Their website's easy to use. They have a zillion different color options. All the components that come with the hardware are metal, not plastic like the ones you buy on Amazon, and I really couldn't say enough good things about this company. If only I could actually remember the name of the company. I want to say it's like Zeus's barn door hardware, but I know that's completely wrong. The other thing I love about this specific barn door kit is that unlike most kits, the actual track that the barn door rides on is not pre-drilled, which means that you drill your own holes, which is easy to do, and it also means that you can mark out exactly where your studs are and only drill holes there, so you don't wind up with a bunch of unnecessary holes or holes that don't go into studs. The last thing you want is that barn door drilled straight into drywall. That's not a good idea for anyone. So after marking out on my track where all the studs were gonna land, I went back out to my wood shop and I drilled holes for each stud, going nice and slow and lubing up the track with a little WD-40, because that's all I had. But hey, it works. Then all I had to do was take it back into the house and just screw that track right into those studs, making sure that it was nice and level. You don't want a barn door that always wants to slide to the right or left. That's not fun. And then finally I had to test it the only way I knew how, which was to hang on it. Because as my grandpappy always said, if it can hold me, it can hold anything. The next morning, I brought the barn door in and I slid it in place. And wow, he can use a tape measure. It slid right on exactly how it should, with just the right amount of clearance on the bottom, about 1/4 of an inch. And for as heavy as this thing is, and believe me, I carried it inside all by myself, it is heavy, it slides effortlessly along that metal track, just how we like it. So with my barn door on the track and gliding smoothly, I added my little floor guide to keep it from swinging out away from the wall. As you can see, it just slides right over that and works great. With that installed, the last thing I had to do was install my stops on either end of the track to keep the barn door from, flying off the track and landing on someone's face. And if you look really close in the background, you can just barely see that bathroom vanity I made a few videos. You could see it. Now I know what you're wondering. That light switch on the wall, that's really inconvenient. Put a light switch behind a barn door. Well, don't worry, that's being taken out and will no longer be functional, so get off my back. With my stops and my floor guide and my track in place, the last and final step was to install the pole on the outside of the barn door. I don't know about you, but I really dig this orange color. I just think it looks cool and industrial and goes great with the oak tone. But if you hate it, make sure to let me know in the comments section. Really give it to me. Give me all your angst and hate in full force. Can't wait.
Well, there you have it. A giant geometric barn door, and as you saw, it's not that hard. So go buy some wood, find a big hole that needs to be covered with a barn door, and make your own. Don't forget to check the video description for a link to my Patreon page, a link to a bunch of tools that I used in here, and some other good stuff. And if you're not doing so already, go follow me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Boodaboo, Blue Fairy. Those last ones aren't real, but they sound like they could be. Anyways, enjoy.